Hey everybody, Seth Campbell here with the new Segue Says podcast. Well, this week we're going to return to one of my favorite activities, which is blending an obscurity by a well-known artist with a big hit by another well-known artist. The two songs this week are The Drop by Peter Gabriel, the obscurity obviously, and Boys of Summer by Don Henley, big hit. Now, these two songs have very little in common except for the chord scale. I guess for the most part they're both in E flat minor, D sharp minor if you prefer. And that's about it, because one is very upbeat, forceful, powerful. One is very dark, moody, introspective, and sort of open-ended, if you will. Now, you'll notice I'm using this pretty distinct sound for this because it works really well with Boys of Summer on the 80s synth pads therein. So I'm using that. It does have an effect on how the drop sounds compared to just played on regular piano. So just, if you're going to mess with sounds, be aware of that. Now, the drop is the final track on Gabriel's 2002 album Up, which I've referenced before when we did the song Growing Up off of that album. And it's a lot like Billy Joel's song And So It Goes at the end of the Stormfront album, in that it's essentially the polar opposite of the craziness of the album. The Up album for Gabriel is very, modern for 2002, electronic, lots of very unusual sounds, effects, and layering and concepts. And it seems to culminate in this song near the end of the album called Signal to Noise, in which he brought in basically an entire string section. And so, of course, this piece would become one of the launching pads for his later orchestra project. And it's basically, I believe it nears 8 minutes, and it ends with this crazy dark, dramatic string buildup, almost like film scoring proportions. And that seems to kind of sum up all of the angst and crazy, off-the-wall emotion of the album. And then tacked on at the very end is this really short little track that's just piano and vocals. And as a matter of fact, it's just the original demo guide vocal, if I have the story correct, because as much as he tried to do it again, Gabriel didn't come up with a take that he liked any better than the guide vocal, so he just decided to use the guide vocal. And since it's so short, I'm going to play it in its entirety here. It's basically sort of 2 verses, 2 choruses, but not quite. You'll see. Moving down the fuselage towards the open door, catch you looking down outside to see what lies ahead. One by one you watch them fall through clouds. One by one you watch them fall, no idea where they're going, but down. As the sun goes down, I sit inside this plane. Notice how the city lights are like the nerves inside the brain. One by one they're going out. Watch them dim. One by one you watch them fall. Wonder where they're falling to. And that's it. It's this beautiful, very introspective song just tacked on at the end of a very out there and crazy album. Much like Billy Joel's And So It Goes, which comes at the end of the very hard rock album, Stormfront, it sort of allows you a moment to release and come to terms with all of the pent-up emotions that the record has given you. And I really love it. It's a story of, I believe, Gabriel's own experience of being up in an airplane from which people were skydiving and watching them just jump out of a plane towards the tiny cityscape below through these layers of clouds, and just the questions that brings up about, sort of our what are we doing? Not in the sense of what are we doing jumping out of a plane, which I think is another question to be asked, but sort of it's easy to get philosophical in situations that seem unusual, I guess is the word I'm looking for, because it's such a bizarre juxtaposition. People jumping out of a plane for sport. It just makes you think on a lot of levels, and I think this song does a great job of capturing that. Now, from the philosophical to the hard rock of the 80s, 1984's Building the Perfect Beast album by Don Henley was led with this single, also in the key of E-flat minor, and making a lot of great use of tensions, the minor 7th and the 9, especially combining the 9 and the minor 3rd. And you can still hear this on the radio just about anywhere. But just in case you're not sure which song it is, here's a verse chorus. It goes something like this. Nobody on the road, nobody on the beach. I feel it in the air, summer's out of reach. Empty lake, empty streets, sun goes down alone. I'm driving by your house, though I know you're not home. And I can see you, your brown skin shining in the sun. You got your hair combed back and those sunglasses on, baby. I can tell you my love for you will still be strong after the boys of summer have gone. Of course you know it, right? It's a song about looking back both in the small scale and the large scale, as some of the later verses get into the changing times around us, but also looking back at a former relationship, a lost love, a lost lifestyle, and wondering, whatever happened to that? We could have made it work. It could have lasted. Now, obviously, these two songs are very different, but when you hear a lot of the chords used, and in particular the voicings of those chords, which, as I said, make Great use of basically above just about any chord in the song: F sharp, F natural, and C sharp. Or in I guess G flat, F, and D flat, because we've referred to it as E flat minor. Those work over just about any chord in either of these songs except for this E major in the drop. So they work over those, and both songs use them very heavily, so we have a connection already in that the chord voicing sounds similar. But of course that's kind of about it. So how would we connect the two of them? Well, it's pretty much what we always have done with two very different songs, is when one finishes, give it a moment of space and bring the other right in. And in this case, I like to do the drop first and then the Boys of Summer. Now, some of these songs, some of these segues work equally well both ways, even when the songs are polar opposites. The one I think of most is Cry Love and Turning Page. Turning Page being very slow, rubato, atmospheric. Well, not quite rubato, but very ethereal. And Cry Love being very syncopated and rhythmic and power-driven and everything. And depending on how you wanted to do that, you could work that either way. In this case, I think it works a lot better with the drop first, because the drop is such a short song. It almost functions as an intro to the Boys of Summer. And the thought is complete, and then you go into the new song. Whereas the Boys of Summer, I mean, everybody knows it, and then you throw on the drop at the ending, and it's very short, so it's not quite long enough to establish a new thought or story in people's heads if they're already engaged in the Boys of Summer. So you get, it's kind of like also with Durban Deep and watching The Detectives, in the sense that you want to do the obscurity first and then the hit. So you combine those two philosophies and you get that it's a lot easier to just start with the drop and go into Boys of Summer. Now, how would that work? Well, as you saw already, the drop has a very quiet, staggered ending. Wonder where they're falling to. And it's this E flat minor 7 with a tension 9, which is the first chord of Boys of Summer. And Boys of Summer in the recording starts off with a drum track, or a drum loop machine, basically. Now, if you're working with a band, you could have the drummer then start the pattern. But if you're working solo, you could let these last chords ring out, and in this E flat minor void, to start this pattern from Boys of Summer, which again is F sharp, F, or G flat, F, D flat. Then bring in the left hand, ramp it up to emphasize the new rhythm. And by the time you've cycled through this opening progression once, it's just G flat, B, C, D flat, B again. You're ready for the verse. Nobody on the road, nobody on the beach. I feel it in the air, summer's out of reach. And there you go. It's easy when you have, both of these songs have sort of an ethereal, spacey sound to them. One because it's Peter Gabriel, the other because it's 80s. So that can really help in going quickly from something slow to something fast, or vice versa, as again we saw with Cry Love and Turning Page. Turning Page being the far more ethereal song in that case. Now, you could do this the other way, and I do want to show you how, because the segue itself works fine. It's just a matter of set list etiquette, I guess, if that's even a term. If it's not, it is now. So basically, you Boys of Summer ends on a jam over the chorus. It fades out in the studio version. I like to end on that last B chord and play some higher notes along the chord scale and chord tones and tensions and just let it fade. Now, of course, the drop starts off with these higher end chords. It's a different chord, but it's in the same scale. So you end on B. The first chord of the drop is an E flat. So it's fairly simple because 2 of the 3 notes are the same, especially if you're throwing in all these chord tones. You have to be a little careful if you're using a sustained pad sound like I am. But this way kind of goes into the element of space that we talked about a few weeks ago with Thunder Rolls Fortress Around Your Heart. And that it works really well. You go into the higher end, make it ambiguous for a moment. Let the notes kind of ring and hang in the air before eventually bringing in a new destination. Moving down the fuselage towards the open door. There you have it. You can do it either way, but like I said, this way is a little more confusing to an audience because it's a song they really know well, and then a very short, sort of almost a tail end to it, and they might not be sure what to make of that. If it was a longer song, you could probably get away with it, but since it's a short song, I really recommend starting with the drop and going into the Boys of Summer. In any event, how you use it is totally up to you. So thanks as always for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. And just a reminder, this is episode 97. 97 episodes. As amazing as that is, that means that in 3 episodes' time, I want to say 3 weeks, but the way my schedule's been going lately, who knows. But in 3 episodes' time, it will be the 100th episode. Stay tuned for something really spectacular. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll be there. Thanks as always. I will see you next week.